I'm walking along the quayside in Greenore, County Louth. It's a beautiful location on the Cooley Peninsula, with the waters of Carlingford Lough sparkling and the mountains of Mourne looming over us. It's a quiet place these days. The railway's gone. The luxury hotel's been pulled down. The ships don't take passengers to Holyhead anymore. But 50 years ago, Greenore was at the centre of a revolution. A media revolution which changed the world. I'm Declan Meehan. This is the story of the Pirate Port.
This is Caroline on 199, your all-day music station.
The time on Radio Caroline, Britain's first commercial radio station, 14 minutes to 6. Tony Blackburn here with All Systems Go.
Good morning to you. And how do you do?
On Radio Caroline North, this is the Jerry Layton Show.
That's absolutely right.
John Sebastian and the Loving Spoonful. Their latest and greatest, Summer in the City. You heard it first on the Sound of the Nation. That's Caroline South.
It's hard to describe just how remarkable it was to hear sounds like that coming out of your radio in the daytime. The Beatles and the Stones were in the charts, but we could only listen to their records on Radio Luxembourg in the evening. All that changed forever when the pirate radio ship Caroline began broadcasting in Easter 1964. Within a few months, disc jockeys like Simon D, Tony Blackburn and Emperor Roscoe had become household names. The station's charismatic founder, Ronan O'Rahilly, was a celebrity in fashionable swinging London. But no one knew about the vital role played by the humble little port of Greenore. George Beattie was born here in the 1930s.
In the middle 1800s, there was great competition in England for trade between Ireland and England with the different railway companies in England. And the London North Western Railway wanted to open a route from Belfast to London, a quick route. So they opened Greenore in the year 1873. Business people could leave Belfast in around about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, get to Greenore in time for the 8 o'clock sailing, reach Holyhead about midnight, and be in London at Euston Station about 9 o'clock the following morning to do their business.
Peter Savage was brought up in Greenore and later became manager of the port. He was told about the town's golden age when it was a holiday destination with a luxury hotel.
There was a very grand dining room in it with views up the loch with the windows either side of a very impressive fireplace, and there were about 50 bedrooms in it. It had an air of being something. The railway ran right down into the refreshment rooms on the back, so it was very convenient for anyone that wanted to get to it. They could travel by train from Dublin, Belfast, and stay in Greenore, play your golf and go walking along the beach and stuff like that. So it was quite a good vacation spot.
And George, what was it like growing up here yourself?
Everybody in Greenore was connected to the railway simply through parents' occupation. It was a free port for anybody, any of us youngsters running around at that time. We had the freedom of the place, the freedom of the railway station, the engine shed, the carpenter shed, and on the ships as well. And while the passenger ship was in, many's a time I was down in the galley with the cooks and maybe with the stevedores getting ready to put the cargo in. When the railway closed on 31st of December 1951, there was a lot of depression in Greenore. People felt distressed, depressed about the whole matter. Greenore was now termed a ghost village.
Greenore Port might have fallen into the sea if it hadn't been rescued by the son of one of the legendary heroes of the Easter Rising. Michael O'Rahilly, always known simply as the O'Rahilly, was killed by a British machine gun in 1916. 40 years later, his son Aegon was a prosperous businessman in Dublin. Peter Savage again.
Aegon O'Rahilly, when he left college in Dublin, the university, he decided he was going to make roofing tiles. And at a later stage, he started to make plasterboard from the gypsum, which he was mining himself in Kingscourt, alongside where British Gypsum were mining. And in the late 1950s, there was a slump in the building trade here, and he was looking at avenues to ship it to England. And he came over as far as Dundalk, wanting to know could he get key space in Dundalk. And he said somebody out there just casually said to him, "Oh no, we have no space for you, but go on away out there, and there's a port out there at Greenore." When he arrived at Greenore, there was only somebody like a watchman there at the time, and they said, "Oh, this is owned by the London and Midland and Western Railway Company in London, and it's non-operational at the moment." So some months later, he was in London, and he went into the office and he said to them, "Would you sell me Greenore Port?" And he said it was just like buying a box of matches. The fellow at the counter said to him, "We will, but it'll be expensive. And we'll be looking for 14,000 for it." And O'Rahilly said, "Well, I'd have to have a think about it and ring my brother tonight." So he came back the next day and he said, "No, we couldn't give you 14,000, but we'll give you 12. So they split the difference later on, and he became the owner of the port just as casually as that, without knowing how he was going to get stuff on board ships or anything.
One of Aegon O'Rahilly's first employees was a local girl who lived on Euston Street, the main street of the old railway town.
I'm Olive French, and I was Olive Caron. I joined Greenore Ferry in 1960. Mr. O'Rahilly interviewed me just outside the office, and I started in September. First of all, I had an office in the old station, which was the waiting room, and I could, at that stage, come in the front door of the railway station, but at that stage I didn't have a watch and there was no clock in the office, so I used to have to ring the lady in the post office and ask her when the time was 5 o'clock or 5:30.
It looked like a suitable site for a film of one form or another, because there was deep water with a breakwater that had been neglected in it, and there was no craneage, and it was sealed off just to keep people out of it, and it was a pretty derelict place.
And at that stage, we had one ship running with containers to Preston, and eventually it became one ship per day. And then on one of those days, a ship arrived in the dock, which I didn't expect, and it was Radio Caroline.
While Aegon O'Rahilly was thinking about roofing tiles and plasterboard, his second son, Ronan, was enjoying a much more glamorous lifestyle as a nightclub owner and artist manager in London Soho. One night he called into the famous Flamingo Club.
Yeah, here we go now. Georgie playing the Blue Flames, and let's listen to Night Train.
I remember being absolutely knocked out, and afterwards I got chatting and I said, "Well, did anyone think of, He said no. So I put together a recording thing and a studio thing, and then I discovered that there was nowhere to play the thing. The EMI and Decca didn't take him, and so I remember saying, "Right, I'll bring out my own record label," which was really stupid because, you couldn't get distribution, you couldn't get anything, it was all locked up. And I went along and I thought, well, I got to get Luxembourg, to play this thing a few hours at night that you could hear now and again. And I remember sitting with the head of Luxembourg, and I said to him, "Look, how many times can you play this?" And he said, "Look, we can't play this thing at all." Then I said, "We've got to start a radio station, haven't we?"
Ronan O'Rahilly knew it was illegal to build a transmitter on land, but he discovered that if you put your studios on a ship and anchor it more than 3 miles off the coast, you could get around the law by claiming to be in international waters. The Australian entrepreneur Alan Crawford was working on a similar idea.
I happened to go and visit a ship called Radio Nord, which was doing exactly the same thing up in the Baltic, and I met the people running it, who happened to be a couple of Texans, and became very friendly with them, and they took the ship back to Texas, and we bought it there. A couple of $100,000, I think.
Meanwhile, Ronan O'Rahilly had bought an old Danish passenger ferry called the Fredericia. Both ships needed somewhere secret to be fitted out as radio stations, and Ronan knew just the place.
I wasn't told anything originally. I managed the office at that stage, and when the ship arrived, everybody was saying, "Well, what is it and why is it here?" So when I inquired about it, I was told that, there was nobody needed to know anything about it. So that's how it was left.
Apparently it had been many years before a popular resort, and there were railway lines rusting, running away from the dock. There were stones missing from the dock and grass a foot high in all directions, and it was really quite a neglected area. And fascinating to see these two ships battling away, building masts and so on all over the place.
I dealt with Ronan on practically a daily basis on the telephone. He always wanted to know what the people thought about this mysterious ship. And when I told them some of them thought it was a radio ship, he said, well, you got to tell them it's not. You got to tell them something else.
Of course, when the mast started to go up, people started to talk, obviously, what in the world is this? And somebody concocted the most wonderful story. They said that, in fact, it was like a periscope upside down, and that it was for finding sponges. And everybody around that area accepted that story 100%.
I don't think anybody actually believed it, because they all knew it was a radio ship, but they all kept quiet about it.
The people that would have been working would be people that were already employed by Aegon in the port, drawing cables to it and lifting cables on and giving them a lift whenever they wanted. But basically, most of the people there would have been imported people that knew something about transmitting.
It was the creepiest place I've ever been to. I did not like it at all. There was a feeling that we were very, very unwelcome, really.
George Saunders arrived in Greenore to work on Alan Crawford's ship, the Mi Amigo, which would be known as Radio Atlanta. He'd been recruited from the famous radio company Marconi in what sounds like a scene from a 1960s spy film.
One evening I went to a pub, and there's a chap sitting down there, and he talked to me about broadcasting transmitters and aerials, which I was interested in, and it was actually my Marconi job. So eventually he suddenly said to me, right, I've got a project. We're going to put a ship in the North Sea broadcasting commercial radio. I think you'd be a very useful member of the project. Are you interested? So he said, right, I'm going to send you an envelope which will contain an airline ticket to Dublin and all the instructions from then on. I went to Heathrow, flew to Collinstown, Dublin Airport, then went to Amen Street Station, and I got out at Dundalk, and there he was. And I recognised him as John Gilman, in fact.
John Gilman was one of two very senior retired BBC engineers who'd been hired to set up Radio Atlanta. But the Fredericia, now renamed Radio Caroline, had a head start.
Ronan was able to buy his ship locally, whereas I had to go back to Houston, so that when it came into harbour, his ship was already tied up, and ours had to moor alongside, one ship away from the wharf, so that we had to climb aboard his ship first to get to ours. And relations were quite strained because there was a strenuous attempt to delay us, which succeeded, in fact.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was real pirates at Penzance. I mean, it was very funny, actually, because it was sort of cutthroat rivalry, which just sort of ended up with people nicking crystals out of one transmitter and putting the wrong ones in and all silly stuff.
I was told that if we could delay them, that would be a good thing for Caroline. And I had a couple of disagreements with Atlanta.
Radio Caroline's chief engineer was Uwe Sjostrom.
So John and I went over and we came aboard, and I sabotaged the ship so they couldn't get started. It took them about 8 to 10 days to come back on air, and then the market was taken away from them.
They were at a slight disadvantage in terms of the sort of rivalry thing, because, of course, it was my family's port, and they did look after us,
Aegon didn't say a lot about it, but my instructions were to do whatever Ronan wanted me to do. So that's basically what I did.
With Greenore Port in a state of lockdown, even the port manager, Olive French, was kept in the dark.
I didn't go on board Caroline, but I was invited on board the sister ship, Mi Amigo, and the captain on there was Captain Oldakovsky, who was like a gypsy man with long black hair. And I found him fascinating, and I found the ship more fascinating because in his cabin there were so many cobwebs, you would think it was curtains coming down and this old man sat in the middle of it. But it was really nice, and he was a good entertainer.
And then in March 1964, the DJs started to arrive. Simon D, soon to be the first voice on Radio Caroline and later a big TV personality, is no longer with us. But here he is talking on a poor quality telephone line in 1974.
When we were fitted out in Greenore, the Scandinavian engineer gentlemen who were fitting all the equipment, all this mysterious tubes and wires and things, because we were really quite a lethal ship in those days. We didn't have much protection against all this high voltage stuff, but we stood wary of it. But we were testing it one evening, and we had a few people ashore with receivers picking up the signal to test the strength. And we were punching out Ray Charles music, because the boss, the genius there, was our signature tune, really. So if anyone was ashore and found some unidentified Ray Charles music playing, he'd know it was Caroline testing. And so we were putting this out. And unfortunately, the Scandinavian gentleman has forgotten to put in a piece of rather vital equipment. The result being that most of Northern Ireland, and certainly everyone within a radius of, I think, something like 5 miles, who had their television sets on that night, whatever was showing was drowned out with Ray Charles starting his amazing blues music. It was very funny.
I chose to sing the blues. Yes,
There was the time when we were ashore, staying at the Ballymascanlon Hotel in Ireland, knowing that the ship down there in the harbour with this tall, pencil, slim mast, over sort of way above all the old broken down buildings near the harbour. There was a build-up knowing that that ship was going out to transmit and do a little bit of a battle against the established broadcasting media, and the way we went to it each day, painting a bit more and testing the record players and things like that, knowing that we were going to go. And I mean, that was incredibly exciting.
Caroline, Caroline, Caroline.
Going back in time on the sounds of the nation, it's the Caroline Flashback.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
With its Dutch crew, its Swedish engineers and a couple of English-speaking DJs, the MV Caroline slipped quietly out of Greenore port on a stormy night in March 1964. The deal between the two pirate radio ships had allocated London and the South East to Radio Atlanta. Radio Caroline was meant to anchor somewhere near the Isle of Man, but Ronan O'Rahilly had other ideas. Simon D was on board.
We sailed down the Irish Sea in this immense gale, and all the time, of course, we were being called up by various radio stations. There was Anglesey Radio called us up. Caroline, Caroline, may we have your destination, please? And of course, the captain in true nautical style said, yes, going to Spain, actually. And then they wished us bon voyage. And then we went further down. We were picked up by Fishguard Radio, who asked us our destination. We gave the same reply. And then we went to Land's End, and we were rounding Land's End Radio, and they called us up, of course, and we said, yes, going to Spain. Well, of course, the minute we'd finished that little conversation, we turned due east and sailed up the channel. It was all very, very exciting.
And so it was that from an anchorage in the Thames estuary, Radio Caroline sailed onto the medium wave and into broadcasting history.
This is Radio Caroline on 199, your all-day music station. We are on the air every day from 6 in the morning to 6 at night. The time right now is 1 minute past 12, and that means it's time for Christopher Moore.
Hello and happy Easter to all of you. This is Christopher Moore with the first record program on Radio Caroline. The first record is by the Rolling Stones, and I'd like to play it for all of the people who worked to put the station on the air, and particularly for Ronan.
And the great thing about Caroline was that, unlike Radio Luxembourg, the signal didn't fade away. From just off the coast of southeast England, it could be heard clearly as far away as Dublin. Alan Crawford was furious that his pitch had been taken. So a few weeks later, Radio Atlanta sailed from Greenore and anchored itself right beside Caroline.
At 201 meters, you're in tune with the Bob Scott Show, Living, Loving, Happy Radio Atlanta, the ship that rocks the ocean. Hello, happy people. Smile a while, it's good for you.
Start becoming so very popular right throughout Britain, and they are called the Pretty Things. And at this stage, before we introduce the next record in the Saturday show, which ends at 4 o'clock, I'd like to remind you of the big features that await you on Radio Atlanta tonight. For instance, at 4 o'clock, Latin Americana, compared by Clive Burrell for half an hour. The best of the ballads at 4:30, compared by popular Richard Harris. At 5 through till 6. Country and Western Review with Johnny Jackson. At 6 o'clock, All Systems Go with your own DJ, Mike Raven. And then from 7 till 8 to close our day's transmission, Neil Spencer's at the microphone to present Music of the Moment. The big features await you on Radio Atlanta.
Meanwhile, on Caroline, a new recruit was getting his sea legs. Alan Turner was known to one and all as Neddy.
On board was Simon D, myself, and Doug Carr, a Canadian. And then there was Uwe and Jan, the two Swedish radio engineers, and that was it. We had Captain Mackay, who was a traditional dyed-in-the-wool ship's captain, always wore the full uniform, peak cap, gold braid, the lot, and the rest of them were Dutch crew. The accommodation, although old, was very comfortable. Had a nice saloon, which had leather-covered settees all the way round the edge, and leather chairs, armchairs to sit at the tables. The cabins were very nice, passenger cabins. The catering varied enormously. That was done by the ship's cook, and some were very good and some were abysmal. We had one man who could only do sauerkraut and sausages.
Poison Ivy by the Paramounts. Elvis Presley time now, Bossa Nova Baby.
There were hardly any records on board because it was originally set up to do the recordings in the studios in London and take them out to the ship. But this didn't work because it wasn't a practical thing to transfer the recorded programmes onto the ship and have any reliable source of programme material.
Billy J. With I Call Your Name. We have a record here by Ray Charles and Betty Carter. Any of you that might have been listening in on the programs over the past week might have heard a few tracks of it. Here's another one, Side by Side.
So that's when it was changed slightly and we started doing all the programmes on board. Now, Simon D and Doug Carr couldn't operate the panel, couldn't or wouldn't, I don't know which. So it was down to Uwe and myself to operate the panel for them.
Now, what can I tell you about the station? Well, our technical equipment, I suppose. Firstly, the transmitters are made by Continental Electronics in the States and are 10 kilowatts each, two of them costing about £50,000 each. The record players are made by Gates, costing about £500 each, and the Ampex tape recorders, I don't know the cost of those, I think they're about £1,000 each. Got about 5 of those. Studio staff, radio staff, well, there's 4 DJs, about 5 electronic brains mixing with their work with panel operating, engineer side. We all do shift work. At the moment, we are just about to start a shift work on the DJ side anyway, of 2 weeks on and 1 week off. Now, well, you know we're here to stay. We've managed to fight the British government and win, and the GPO and the customs and generally everybody else. And thank you once more for your interest in our station. And from me now, and all of you, to all of you, from all of us, bye-bye.
The pirate ships pulled in huge audiences from the outset. It was estimated that 10 billion people were tuning in. But the advertising didn't come along as quickly, and both companies realised that having two ships in the same place made no commercial sense. So they merged. Radio Atlanta became Radio Caroline South, and the original Caroline ship sailed round to a new anchorage off the Isle of Man, broadcasting as she went.
We set sail at midnight on July the 3rd, and it was about 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. Tom Lodge burst into my cabin and said, "Quick, have a look out of the window." And the top of Beachy Head was packed with people watching.
And the time on Radio Caroline is high noon.
So I went back down to my cabin, unscrewed the big mirror off of the wall over the hand basin, went up onto the bridge and started flashing the shoreline. And it was magical. It was as though someone had put a switch on and the whole shoreline just lit up with this incredible number of thousands of mirrors and car headlights and all sorts.
And welcome to Music Round Lunchtime. Tom Lodge here, music for the next 2 hours from 12 until 2. And I've just been up on the bridge and having a glorious look at Brighton as we slowly approach it. And I think we should be about opposite the pier right now. So, to all of you in Brighton, here is Peter and Gordon.
Nobody I know could. Here's a message to all those in Brighton or Hove or Blackrock, anywhere along the coast there, who can see us or hear us or both or one. Why not flash your headlights at us? We'd love to see the whole coast lighting up. Yes, lighting up, yes. Neddy's having hysterics with light. Hey, Neddy, how are you feeling? Maximum response, Tom. Maximum response. Really? Yes. Good. Well, it's 7 minutes after 12. Let's go on with music. Here are the Springfields.
Soon, the renamed Radio Caroline North was anchored safely in Ramsey Bay. But the old tensions and rivalries soon surfaced in the newly merged company. Engineer George Saunders.
I went to Fredericia soon after the merger to sort out all the problems. Now, this station had been on the air something like, 3 months? Condition in which I found her, she only had one working transmitter. So I busied myself with a meter and I found the voltages were much higher than should have been. And I asked the engineer in charge of the installation, I said, well, what on earth has been going on?
Once one of the chiefs from the southern ship came up when I was ashore in Stockholm, and when he came back to London, he reported that the northern ship was not properly run the way he saw it. So I was called down to London and I asked what was the problem. It was that on the southern ship, the chief engineer always closed down the station, put the keys in his pocket, went down to his cabin, came up 5:30 the next morning, turned the transmitters on, and I said, we don't bother with that nonsense.
So I was absolutely livid at this lack of knowledge on his part, and eventually I sacked him. You know, I discussed it with London and said, get rid of him. So I did.
But for the listeners, Caroline North was a huge hit. Right across Northern England and the east coast of Ireland, audiences were hungry for this new style of broadcasting.
Oh my goodness me, that's it. Yum-day-dee-day-dum-day-do. We got to get out and finish the show. Yes, that's all we have time for. Hope you've enjoyed the past 3 hours of what you've been able to hear of them, of the late and early show. Hope you've had a little bit of fun, a little bit of sentimentality, or maybe just plain mentality from your super. Just about a minute's time, or at least a minute's time, it'll be Dave Williams with the news, and then after that it will be big, wide, wonderful Daffy Don Allen who will be in here, and I can tell you one thing, John. Too good to be true. That's the only way I could say it. That is the only possible way you could say it. John Allen is too true to be good. No, too good to be true. Yeah, that. Hey, yeah. I shall return, my darlings, at 12 noon with the Caroline Countdown Show yet again. Running through the Caroline Top 50 for you. Throwing in a few sure shots. And a few fooling arounds as well. You know, we'll probably have a mad old time. I'll tear my shirt in pieces for you once again. Have a pleasant morning. Have a wonderful and
one of the North
Sunday
Ship's
morning.
biggest stars was Jerry Layton. He's never spoken about his time as a pirate DJ, but we tracked him down in England, and he told us about how he developed his on-air personality.
It's an act. I was playing at being a disc jockey. That's what I get paid for. And that's what happened on the boat. I just tried to be different, tried new things, tried not to repeat myself too often and do the same stuff, which is very difficult. That's really all it was. It's an act.
Thank you very much indeed there, Carl. Don't forget that, will you? £4 for a Caroline transistor radio. The time now, 20 minutes past 8 o'clock, and having a look out the window, it's sort of grayed over a little bit here in Ramsey Bay. We've got a little rough weather. Phil Perkins, who just brought me up a cup of tea, he's one of our engineers, our radio engineers, Phil. He said that the wind is going in the opposite direction to the current, which sort of means that we're liable to get a collision of wind and water, and that's very, very dangerous indeed.
If the weather was rough, and it very often was, you'd go out to the ship, the tender would move round to the leeward, sheltered side, and the waves would be something like, well, talking in old money, 20 feet, 30 feet, and there'd be a grappling net hung over the side, and you would wait for the tender to rise up to the top of one of these waves, and when it reached its peak, you jump across and grab the net. You throw your suitcase first. Second wave, you'd leap across. If you slip or anything goes wrong, you could be crushed between the two boats.
12 o'clock on 199 Radio Caroline. And before those waves knock me over, let's bring on my signature tune, Booker T and the MGs, a little thing called Outrage. I think.
The self-styled royal ruler, Tony Prince.
We made it.
You can probably still hear I've got a northern accent. It's not quite as northern as it was when I was 20. And I never really understood, if they had a North ship, why I went on the South ship. But I wasn't arguing. I was a radio DJ at last, and I found that really wonderful. But Ronan O'Reilly was sitting in his office one day, and by all accounts, he turned to Chris Moore and he said, "What's he saying?" I couldn't understand some of the stuff I'd said in a northern accent. Chris Moore said, "He's a northerner." Ronan said, "Well, get him up bloody north then."
But I'm an English boy, and I love Radio Caroline. I hope you're digging the show too, because right now it's time for a rave up with the king. Till the end of the day, baby. Baby, I feel good.
The Irish listeners were our most loyal. I got so much mail from Ireland. I started doing gigs there in 1966. I think Dickie Rock and the Miami were the first ones to invite me over there, because I was the only DJ on Caroline North playing show band records. You know, Brendan Bowyer, the Royal Show Band Waterford. They had some great records out, and I used to slip them in for the Irish listeners because of that mail.
Everybody listened to it because they felt it was part of us. And I always used hope that somebody'd ring me up, that I could get them to play a request for me, but they didn't.
Newsbeat, bringing news to the nation. This is Radio Caroline Newsbeat, fast and factual.
London. In today's general election, the Labour government are confident of maintaining power with an overall majority of at least 100. Polling is reported brisk across the country.
All right, now, everybody move to the whiplash. I'm holding the whip, you move. That's the way, baby, move it.
I'm Roger Gale. I'm now the Member of Parliament for North Thanet in Kent, and I've been the Member of Parliament there for 30 years. I was an actor. I just finished a season of Shakespeare. And a friend of mine said, "We're desperate." They had to be desperate to take me, and they needed a disc jockey. I didn't know the first thing about it. I did it as an actor. I mean, I acted being a disc jockey. I didn't have a clue about the music or anything. It wasn't my cup of tea. I enjoyed it. I mean, I learned about it. Of course, you can't do hours and hours of broadcasting every day and not learn how to do it. It was a very good experience. We got paid in cash, £20 a week. I don't know what anybody else got, but all found. So, of course, yeah, you're on the boat. There's nothing to spend it on. We got free beer and free cigarettes and food and accommodation. Well, what more? There's nothing to spend money on. So we went ashore for a week every fortnight. So, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. So we had 3 weeks' money paid like a wage packet in cash when we went ashore. Well, 60 quid for a 21-year-old or whatever in those days was actually a lot of money for a week.
That's Solomon's birthday, that is.
Dances from the TV show.
Dance, dance, dance. 9 minutes after 10 o'clock on party time. This is Roger Gale. All right, you want to dance? Okay.
Get you up in the midnight hour.
1, 2, 3, 4. Let the kids dance.
One of Caroline North's best remembered moments is the on-air wedding of DJ Mick Lovesit and Jan Terrett, the sister of another DJ in 1966. The responsibility for organising it fell to Ronan O'Reilly's old friend George Hare, who was now in charge of liaison between the two Caroline ships and their London office.
That day was a real pain for me. There was fog in the Isle of Man and the planes couldn't land at the airport.
The ring has now been placed on Miss Janet Terrett's finger, and Janet in turn places the finger on William James Brown, otherwise known as Mick Lovesit.
Because of the ship's registration, I went to the Panamanian embassy and got the whole ceremony.
I, Martin Gibbs, captain of the Panamanian merchant vessel MV Caroline, by the authority vested in me by the laws of Panama, now pronounce you man and wife.
I was in charge up in the Isle of Man to make sure we got supplies and everything else, and then I had an office in the Isle of Man. We gave them so much publicity. They were delighted to have us there. We were royalty in the Isle of Man.
Isle of Contrasts, Isle of Beauty, the Isle of Man. Nowhere in the British Isles is there so much choice and variety for a holiday as on the Isle of Man, the happy holiday island. There's beauty all around you on the Isle of Man. Beautiful glens, rugged mountains, quaint seaside villages, and miles of warm, golden sands.
We got sacks of mail, Post Office 3, Ramsey was our address, and we got sacks of mail for Post Office 3. And then when any celebrity would go out and visit the ship, there'd always be, because there'd be a live broadcast with them. I remember Freddie and the Dreamers went out. And then when they come back into the quay, the quays are full of teeny boppers and everyone else waiting to see the stars.
Now, on Radio Caroline North, the moment we've all been waiting for. Here are the Fab Four, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, talking with Caroline's Tom Lodge.
Right, well, this is the big recording session with the four, the big four, that is, the one and only Paul, John, George, and Ringo. How about that? Baffle Brothers. Absolutely. Welcome aboard, Baffles. Thank you very much indeed, John. And now I'd like a few words from you, my dear Paulo.
My host. Well, it's nice to be in the actual captain's kitchen, and the captain himself is stirring up a right old brew.
Thank you very much.
Meanwhile, back in Greenore, Olive French was running an increasingly successful port.
For a couple of years, it was very, very busy. We had a ship every day, and we had a ship going to Rotterdam, and there was plenty of work for all the local people. I stayed there until I got married in 1966. I was transferred then to Sharpness in Gloucestershire to open container service from Sharpness to Greenore. And then we also opened another shipping service to Rotterdam.
Sadly, it didn't last for either of the O'Reillys, father or son. In 1967, the British government passed the Marine Offences Act, which extended the 3-mile limit to 10 and prohibited UK citizens from working or advertising on the pirate ships. Versions of Radio Caroline carried on, but the golden age was over. Meanwhile, the container traffic had dried up, rising fuel prices and competition from British gypsum damaged Aegon O'Reilly's business, and Greenore went into another decline. But the O'Reilly family connection didn't cease altogether. If you visit the port office today, you'll find Aegon's granddaughter, Vanessa Price.
My grandfather asked me to come and work here, and at the time I had finished studying, and I came up thinking I could work here for a year and get some experience. And when I saw the place, the Cooley Peninsula, the mountains of Moore, I thought this was very beautiful. You don't expect to see this on the east coast of Ireland. It was extraordinary, and the business itself was very interesting, and the people who work here, very nice, good people to work with. So I've stayed here, happily working here, despite the fact that the family sold the business over 10 years ago now.
I saw more of Aegon. I used to see him every time I went home. He always went up on the beach to read the paper and have a snooze at lunchtime. And if I was home, I knew that he'd be there, so I'd go up and have a chat with him. And I saw him practically right up until the year he died.
Aegon O'Reilly worked until he was in his 90s. He died in 2000, aged 95. What would he have made of the great reputation of Radio Caroline?
He was a law-abiding citizen, and he didn't want to necessarily appear to be back in what was a sort of a not a law-abiding system. So, but he was still proud that his son was coming up with the concept and was fitting out the ship, and he didn't deny him any facilities in the port.
Was there any financial backing or input?
Well, like all parents, I suspect there might have been some along the way, although Ronan at that stage was fairly healthy in his own right financially, you know. He had done a couple of things that were paying off, and he was astute in a different way than Aegon. But he was astute enough, so I don't know whether any money passed hands at that stage, but I'm sure there probably was.
They were father and son. Their father used to worry about Ronan a lot, but it was a nice relationship. When he was in my office, he would often phone him up and have a long chat with him. And I felt from listening to the conversations that it was just a father and son relationship.
Ronan would have had a fractious relationship with his father. Not that they went through periods of time where they didn't speak, but they had two very different ideologies, or maybe they were flip sides of the same coin. But Ronan wouldn't have had anything to do really with the conventional business of Greenore, as far as I'm aware.
Well, they were very much alike in many senses. Ronan was fairly entrepreneurial, not necessarily just in the normal business sense, but he was contemplating a television service out of an aeroplane up and down England. So the relationship, I think, split for a while when Ronan was working with him in Dublin over policy within the tile factory, but they were quite friendly.
We'd love to talk to Ronan O'Rahilly about Greenore, but he's not well enough to be interviewed. He lives in Drogheda these days with his girlfriend and carer, Inez. And of course, we wish him well. Vanessa Price remembers him as her glamorous uncle.
To us, he was like this great exciting figure, and he was an exotic figure involved in this great world of rock music and pop music in London that we would have, on the fringes of the British Isles there watching Top of the Pops on a Friday night. That would have been our typical connection to it. And then we had this great long white-haired uncle who would appear from London with gadgets or whatever. London was remote and exotic, and Ronan was part of that world.
And were the O'Reillys a conservative family and Ronan was a rebel, or was everybody a bit of a rebel?
You see, there was all these paradoxes, weren't there? Because you might have said they were a conservative family, and yet a lot of them had spent time in prison. So, how does that? So there was always that contradiction there.
And why was the radio station called Caroline? Speaking in 1982, Ronan O'Rahilly, ever the piratical outlaw, claimed that the name itself was a dig at the authorities.
I was travelling to America to buy the transmitters, and I opened a magazine, and there was a spread of Caroline Kennedy, and it was Caroline Smiles and Government Stops was the sort of caption. And all these other people were sort of sitting around waiting for Caroline to disappear, which she wasn't about to do.
It was extremely exciting, and the fact that we didn't really know what was going to happen when it left Greenore, that was the most fascinating thing about it. And it used to be good to hear them on the radio and think, well, I've had a part in that.
There is a fondness for the idea when anyone hears records locally and they hear of Radio Caroline, or indeed some of the DJs that were originally on Radio Caroline.
I think everybody's forgotten that I was even there, which is a bit sad because it was my baby, really.